Thanks to Arvind and Apollo Hospitals for having us here and to be a part of this wonderful conference. I'm Dr. Naresh. I chair HL7 India. As a day job, I head IT at Continental Hospitals in Hyderabad. In the time given to me, I think as the name of the presentation goes, I'm going to briefly touch upon these few points. First is to understand what HL7 is, why standards in healthcare IT, then the organizations per se which are involved in defining and socializing those standards in the industry, right? And why do we need healthcare interoperability, right? So yesterday I was attending all those sessions. I feel that, we've discussed so many important pieces in this healthcare IT ecosystem. I think I'm happy that the scientific committee has created a interoperability and a standard as a session per se, as a one particular session. Because for people who attend conferences, it's like interoperability standards is one or two talks in the whole event, right? So I'm happy that, we have one separate session on interoperability and standards. And I'll briefly touch upon it, what HL7 and other standards would help achieve this vision of having a healthcare interoperability, especially in the Indian healthcare context and the way ahead. First thing, I think you people are from the industry. I don't have to tell you what HL7 is and what HL7 can do. But just to briefly touch upon, it's a messaging standard, right? It's widely used across healthcare applications, both in India as well as in the Western worlds, right? It basically gives you a framework, right? It's a standard. It gives you a framework where you can facilitate the integration and exchange of data across applications and devices, right? And because it's a standard, it helps you how to do things like that, right? And obviously when I got into HL7 3-4 years back, into the HL7 India foray, I thought, why is it 7, why not 8, why not 9 and all that, why the term 7 has come up. So after reading through and understanding, it says that because it relates with the application layer at the ISO model, which is the 7th level of the ISO communications portal. Because it relates with applications, so I think this slide generally gives you how you connect different systems. You obviously have the physical data network wherein the computer system would work. But the 7th layer is where the applications are. And HL7, and not only HL7, other standards also play a role at that particular level, the 7th level, which deals with applications. So coming back, I think we'll discuss why standards in healthcare IT. Right, and obviously standards are applicable to every industry and domain. But in the industry of healthcare IT, standards do play a major role. Right? So in India especially, you have a diverse landscape as far as healthcare is concerned. So you have the primary facilities, you have the diagnostics, you have the quaternary tertiary care hospitals, and all these hospitals have systems, at least to some extent, or some don't have any systems at all. When I talk systems, the IT systems. Right? And because of this, if there's no standard or if there's no IT systems running with standards, sharing of data across applications, across facilities is a challenge. Obviously, there's a way of doing things. Without standards also you can exchange data. But the effort, if you evaluate the effort which goes into sharing of data with standards and without standards, obviously the standardized way is the easier way out and you can achieve more. And as I said, because without standards, there is loss of vital clinical information, right? So because of that, obviously the cost of healthcare, the cost of treatments, the outcomes are all affected. That's the reason we need to have standards. See, standards for me has got two different parts. First is the technical aspect of it, of which standard to use, where to use, how to use. But the other aspect is where is the need for standards? Why do we need standards in healthcare? Right? Why do we need to understand the patient's data coming from a different hospital or a different diagnostic center or a different primary healthcare setup? Will the doctors help? Will it help the patient's treatment? Will it help the doctors understanding the whole history of the patient? Right? So there are two distinct pieces, I think, which we need to understand and evaluate. And because we're in India, because we have situations where there is no nationwide EHR, there is no patient portal, there is no personal medical record for a citizen per se, right? There are private entities who've come up with patient portals, come up with patient medical records for patients within their ecosystem. But if you look at it at a holistic perspective of having such sort of systems in place for every citizen in India, I think standards do play a major role, and HL7 obviously does play a important aspect of it. So because we are discussing standards, I think for people in the industry should appreciate that there are a huge number of standards. You have HL7, you have ICD, you have people talking about SNOMED CT, you have DICOM and all that. But because we know there are standards, what is important is how do we make use of standards, where do we make use of the standards? That is very important. Just discussing the technical aspects of it is fine. Yes, we need people who understand the standards to implement them. But I think the need is for people to understand where is the need. Until unless you have that in place, people would get confused. So coming back, I think what standards do. Because they are standards, they standardize the way in which we do things, right? So they define, they educate, and facilitate. Those are expected out of standards. I think we in HL7 also, in HL7 India, do such stuff like that. To just briefly touch upon what HL7 India is, HL7 India is an international affiliate of HL7 International. HL7 International is the standards development organization whose main forte is to develop HL7 standards. It could be version 2, version 3, or the latest buzzword, which is FHIR. We are a part of that. Our representatives, our members, our governing council members do participate in these standards development organizations, the discussions coming out with new forms and formats of FHIR and version 3, so that it will help us in India sitting to implement those things, right? So people who want to join HL7, I think the takeaway for them is to understand what is happening at an international level as far as standards and HL7 is concerned. How do we implement them? How do we customize them? How do we adopt those standards in our daily practice? That's essentially what we do. So healthcare IT in India and the use of standards, because the title says relevant to Indian healthcare IT, I think I've broadly categorized the healthcare IT ecosystems into 3 main areas. So you have the IT companies in India servicing India and the Western markets, which use quite a lot of standards. We have the private healthcare, we have the public healthcare. So broadly, categorized these 3 areas where some sort of standards are being used now, especially for private healthcare or a hospital where I work. We do use quite a lot of standards, right? So because we have one unit hospital, my EMR, my LIS, my RIS talks across with each other with HL7. Until unless I have HL7, it will be very difficult for me to at least pass on that information. Doctors appreciate that, right? If you ever get time to visit my hospital, I think you will see patients don't carry those big forms, prescriptions, record, because everything is online, right? I've answered patients saying that why you don't give, generally what other hospitals give. I say everything is on the EMR. Once your patient walks into the hospital, opens up the EMR, all his or her data, his previous data is all available. And they do talk with RIS and LIS lab applications through these standards. I think let's come back to what interoperability is, right? So we've discussed standards, we've discussed what are those standards, what HL7 is, what HL7 does, and what HL7 can do. But to understand what healthcare interoperability, I would broadly categorize into 3 main areas. First is what is healthcare interoperability, where is it used, where it should be used, and how it could be used. Right? So if you understand we know what healthcare interoperability is. It's a concept wherein we make sure those devices and systems start sharing data. And not only data, not any data, but a data which is meaningful, data which will help the clinicians and the healthcare practitioners make use of data, treat the patients better. That's more about the what of healthcare interoperability. Coming to where, it could apply within a healthcare facility. Obviously, you have a tertiary or quaternary care hospital will have different systems working. You have a lab system, you have a radiology system, you have different systems working. So until unless you have those connected, obviously it will have a direct impact to the patient care, right? It could be across facilities also, within a chain of hospitals or within private to government setup. So it will apply to all those areas. And how? So the how aspect is where we need to think about, strategize, and plan well, right? So if you understand this, because I was a student in the NHS and studying, and there, whenever I talk of interoperability, when I talk of standards, I take the National Program for IT in the NHS in the UK as an example. It's a brilliant case study for all of us who want to start on this journey, right? Was it successful? Was it unsuccessful? It's a question for us to answer and discuss. So I don't have an answer for that. But the takeaway is what? If you try to understand what NPFIT was actually conceptualized for, so you have the spine, you have the electronic patient records, you have the CPOE, you have the different components of the NPFIT. But the major one was the spine. At a conceptual level, it was a brilliant idea, wherein you have a spine running across the entire UK healthcare system, wherein the patient's records are quite interoperable. So a patient is going from south of England to north of England, getting admitted there, all his or her records were conceptualized to be available on the spine. And if you go into the details, the basic information would lie on the spine, the detailed medical information would lie at the hospital level. But doctors were or should be able to extract those data out of the spine. At a concept level, it was a brilliant idea. But execution, I know there are issues in that. So scope of interoperability, I think Indian healthcare network has two major parts, as you all know. You have a public and you have a private setup. But for us to understand, get the feel of interoperability, make interoperability work, have nationwide EHRs, have nationwide patient portals, I think there has to be a demand. Until unless, in quite economic terms, until unless you have the demand there, the supply would not be sufficient, right? We have industry stalwarts, we have people who understand these standards, we have people who can get things done. But until unless there's a demand from either from the government or from the private healthcare setup, which says that yes, this interoperability is a need of the hour. There is a need for doctors to understand patients' healthcare, for patients' records to come, irrespective of whichever location and place the patient visit. I think till that time is there, then we will have to plan well. So the way forward, I think I'm happy Professor Subtain was here. He mentioned about the standards, which a committee which has been formed. There is a mention of standards and what kind of standards should be used where. I think it is time to make that mandatory, time to understand what the scope of it and how do we strategize that. There needs to be a consortium which is formed by industry stalwarts who can make sure these standards are put into use and share data across applications so that the outcome is better, the patients are treated better, the patients are taken care of.